I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman with a developmental disability. Her daughter, who was in her 40s, worked overnights, and she needed a caretaker with medical experience to watch her overnight. When I say I once worked for them, I mean I literally worked once, just this night. And you're about to hear why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name was Giselle. Her daughter's name, who contacted me, was Evelyn. It's possible Evelyn didn't have any other family to watch her and didn't want to or couldn't afford to put Giselle in a nursing home. Or it was possible that she felt more comfortable hiring somebody with some form of experience to watch over her. At the time, I was already a direct care worker for 2 other women who suffered from some forms of developmental disabilities, so I had experience, but nothing prepared me for that night. Evelyn left for work earlier that day. I worked my first job, so I was really pushing my body to exhaustion, trying to make as much money as possible. Evelyn had introduced Giselle and me. Giselle had given me a smile before Evelyn brought her upstairs to her bedroom for the night. It was around 9 p.m. Evelyn told me that Giselle would sometimes walk around the house at night, acting confused, and I'd need to calm her down and bring her back to her room. She specifically addressed this not to be a form of sleepwalking. When I asked, she said it's one of the symptoms of her mother's dementia. I told her to rest assured that I'd know how to handle it. I spent my time initially in the living room, catching up on my show. These jobs aren't super glamorous, and for the most part, it is a lot of sitting around. I heard footsteps from upstairs. I went to the stairway and looked up the stairs, then called Giselle's name, asking if she needed anything. She didn't answer. I heard her footsteps go back to her room, and then the door closed. Maybe she went to the bathroom. I went back to the living room and watched some more TV. It was maybe an hour later that I got up to grab my sandwich that I brought from the fridge. As I left the kitchen with a plate and my sandwich to go back to the couch, I nearly had a heart attack and dropped the plate when I saw Giselle standing at the doorway, glass shattered everywhere. I apologized to her and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me, "Who are you?" I reminded her who I am, that I'm her direct care worker here to make sure she's okay. Everything she said at this point was in a loud scream, "Why are you here? I don't know you." Things of that nature. I reminded her that we had just met and that her daughter Evelyn hired me to watch her and the house. This seemed to work for long enough for me to get her to come back upstairs with me and to her room. I brought her up a glass of water and some melatonin. I made sure she took both before going back downstairs. After a few hours, I was absolutely exhausted. I had to get a couple of hours of shut-eye. There was a spare bedroom upstairs with a twin-sized bed where Evelyn said I could rest if needed. I felt like at this point, Giselle was asleep for the night from the melatonin. I fell asleep within minutes, but I was asleep for only maybe an hour. I woke up to a sound from downstairs. It was this repeated slamming every 1 to 2 seconds. Something from downstairs was being slammed. I jumped out of the bed. I had left the bedroom door open so that I'd hear anything if Giselle got up, case in point, right here. When I got to the stairs, I realized the slamming was coming from the kitchen. I walked down the stairs as quickly as I could while still remaining quiet. Getting to the bottom, I peered around the opening to the kitchen, and what I saw was like a scene from a scary movie I'd seen before. I saw Giselle in the darkness, standing in front of the oven, repeatedly opening it and slamming it shut. It was horrifying. When I say I saw Giselle, I really only saw her silhouette. It was that dark in the kitchen. I said, "Giselle," really loudly. She stopped, turned to her left at me, shut the oven door one final time, and started walking towards me, towards the stairs. I said in a now softer, kind of scared-sounding voice, "Are you okay?" She got close enough to me where I could now see her facial features, and she looked at me with this blank expression, then walked right past me and started walking up the stairs. I followed her upstairs, but as soon as she got to her room, she slammed her door shut. I knocked on the door, saying, "Giselle, are you all right?" She didn't respond. I quietly opened the door just to peek inside, and I saw Giselle at the side of her bed, just standing facing the wall. I've seen a lot, but this was some pretty unsettling behavior that I feel like is the exact kind of stuff you'd see in some scary movies, like I mentioned before. I walked over to her and gently eased her into the bed. When she was lying down, I covered her, and for what I was hoping would be the final time, I said, "Good night, Giselle," and shut her door. I went across the upstairs to the spare room and went back to bed. I purposely tried not to fall asleep for at least half an hour, just in case she'd wake up again, but I don't even know if I made it that long. All I know is I fell asleep pretty freaking quickly. I woke up once again, however, much later. The room was still pitch black, and the 1-hour alarm I set had not yet gone off. I looked around the room, wondering what woke me up. I didn't see what it was until I heard a sound from inside the closet. I then noticed the cracked open closet door and the black shadow of a head peeking out of the closet. Again, I almost had a heart attack. I said, "Giselle." She didn't answer. I kept saying, "Giselle," a bunch of times until she pushed the door open, and I saw her approaching the bed slowly. She started saying what she was saying hours ago again, "Who are you? I don't know you." As she got closer, I tried calming her down, reminding her who I am. I reached for the lamp next to the bed and fumbled with it until it turned on. Giselle was holding a huge kitchen knife in her hand. At this moment, everything changed. Giselle was now a threat to my life, and I had to worry about myself, not her. I screamed at this point, "Giselle, put the knife down." I guess my scream stressed her out because she got closer and started screaming back at me, still repeating, "I don't know you." I wasn't going to attempt to calm down a knife-wielding dementia patient. That was not in any job description. I mapped out a way to run around her in the bedroom, and I went for it. I jumped off the bed on the side further from her, and she screamed again, "Who are you?" She swung the knife at the air as I ran past her. It was a slow and weak swipe from what I saw, but nonetheless, it showed that she had intentions of actually using it. I got downstairs, grabbed my shoes, and went outside. Instead of calling 911, I called Evelyn as she requested I do if there was an issue. I was courteous in doing this because getting law enforcement involved is never doing anyone any favors. Evelyn was yelling into the phone at me not to leave her. Honestly, I yelled back that she attempted to kill me and that I didn't call the police. She had to leave work. Of course, I stayed outside of the house, making sure Giselle didn't go anywhere until Evelyn returned. When Evelyn went inside, Giselle was back in her bed, asleep. Evelyn went as far as accusing me of exaggerating the whole thing until she found the knife next to Giselle's bed. To not give her any more fuel to blame me for any of this, I left out the fact that I ever went to sleep. But that doesn't mean that I felt in any way I did anything wrong. Evelyn even offered me that room to sleep. I never worked in that house again. Giselle was a scarier patient than I'd ever dealt with in any of my jobs in my 9 years of being a direct care aide. The Irene's residence loomed large and old at the end of a gravel driveway, the late summer sun casting long, eerie shadows over its peeling white paint. I'd been babysitting for a few years now, but this was my first time with the Irene kids, Galvin, 9-year-old, and Vivian, 5-year-old. Mrs. Irene had left in a hurry, promising she'd be back by midnight. I waved her off and turned to face the two children, their faces blank with curiosity. The evening started innocently enough. I fixed the kids some macaroni and cheese, and we watched cartoons together. Galvin seemed shy but well-mannered, and Vivian, though quiet, had a sweet smile that made me feel at ease. It was around 9 p.m. when I tucked them into bed, reading them a story until they drifted off. As I descended the creaky stairs, I settled on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The house was old and creaky, every sound amplified in the silence. I shrugged off the eerie feeling that seemed to settle over the room. That's when my phone rang. I frowned, it was an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered, hello. There was a long pause filled only with static. I was about to hang up when a voice, distorted and barely audible, whispered, "Have you checked on the children?" A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at the baby monitor on the coffee table, the screen showing Galvin and Vivian sound asleep. My logical mind told me it was just a prank call, but something in the voice felt wrong. I hung up and tried to shake off the unease. Minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID was blank. I picked it up with trembling hands. "Who is this?" I asked. The same static-filled silence, followed by the same whisper, more insistent now, "Check on the children." My heart pounded as I crept upstairs, peeking into the children's room. They were still asleep, undisturbed. I exhaled, feeling relieved, and returned to the living room, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. The third call came almost immediately after I sat down. The voice was different now, more menacing. "If you don't check on the children, something bad will happen." Fear surged through me, and I bolted upstairs, flinging the door open. The room was as I had left it, but Galvin's bed was empty. Panic welled up as I scanned the room, finding him standing in the corner, his back to me. "Galvin," I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't respond. I stepped closer, my heart racing. Just as I reached out to touch him, his head snapped around, eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth moved without making a sound. The baby monitor crackled to life, and I could hear a low, guttural whisper repeating, "Check on the children." I grabbed Galvin, pulling him back to bed and tucking him in tightly, my hands shaking as I did. I heard soft, creaky footsteps behind me. I turned sharply, but the room was empty. Desperate to break the tension, I picked up the baby monitor, thinking it might be malfunctioning. The screen flickered, showing static before focusing back on the children. This time, there was a shadowy figure standing at the foot of Vivian's bed, its form indistinct but looming. I blinked, and it was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Mrs. Irene, hoping for some reassurance. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. I was about to hang up when a voice came through. But it wasn't Mrs. Irene. It was the same distorted whisper from the calls, "They're not your children." Terrified, I ran back to the children's room, nearly tripping on the stairs in my haste. I found them both awake, sitting up in bed, staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The man," Vivian whispered, "the man with no face. He's watching us." A shiver ran down my spine. I looked around the room, but it was just us. "There's no one here, sweetie. You're safe." But as I turned off the light, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, something tall and dark standing in the doorway. I slammed the door shut, my mind racing. What was happening? Who was this faceless man? The phone rang again, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. With trembling hands, I answered. "Leave the house," the voice hissed. "Leave now, or you will never leave at all." I grabbed the children, my heart pounding in my chest. We ran downstairs, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. Just as we reached the front door, it swung open, revealing Mrs. Irene standing there, her eyes wide with shock. "What's going on?" she demanded. I don't know," I stammered. There were calls and a man. "The children," she looked past me, her face paling. "The children." I turned, blood running cold. Galvin and Vivian were gone. My first day as a plumber started like any other. A call came in from an older woman in a creaky old house on the edge of town, reporting severe leaks in her kitchen. I was eager to make a good impression and maybe score a repeat customer. I had no idea what I was in for. When I arrived, the house was shrouded in an unsettling stillness. The lady, Mrs. Beatrix, was a frail, wary woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. She led me back in 2004. I was a broke teenager, so my mom made me get a job at our local McDonald's. It was nothing special. It was my very first day working at McDonald's. I was so nervous but excited to start my new job. I got the breakfast shift and had to be there to start prepping at 5 a.m. I hardly slept the night before, anxious about making a good impression. I arrived early, introduced myself to the manager, Callista, and she got me set up. I spent the first hour or so watching training videos and filling out paperwork. Callista said I was picking things up quickly and could start helping out up front. Around 7:30 a.m., things started to pick up as we got into the core breakfast rush. I was working the register, taking orders and collecting payments. We had a full restaurant, people eating, people waiting in line. I recognized a few regulars Callista pointed out. About a half hour into my register duty, the front door chimed as a customer walked in. He was a white man, probably early 40s, average height and build, wearing jeans, boots, and a plain black windbreaker. He quietly got into line, keeping his head down. When he got to me, he ordered a sausage McMuffin meal to go and handed me a $10 bill. As I opened the cash drawer to make change, he suddenly pulled out a gun from his coat pocket. I froze in terror and shock. This couldn't be happening, I thought. The man shouted violently for everyone to get down and shut up or he would start shooting. A woman nearby let out a scream, which agitated the man. In a flash, he rapidly fired the gun at her, and the bullet hit her directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor, the whole scene unfolding in mere seconds. The robber grabbed me by the shirt over the counter and put the hot barrel firmly into my cheek. His eyes were bulging and frenetic, like he was on heavy drugs. He told me to empty the cash register drawer immediately into a bag he threw at me. My hands were quivering so badly I could hardly grasp the money. Meanwhile, the rest of the lobby had erupted into pandemonium, with some people running for the door and others ducking behind tables. Just then, the manager, Callista, came rushing out from the back area. She saw the woman bleeding out on the tiled floor, then the robber pressing the gun to my face. I could see Callista assessing the situation, hesitating for a moment on what to do next. In that pause, the crazed robber suddenly withdrew from me and fired 2 consecutive shots directly at Callista. A piercing temporary deafness filled my ears. Callista's body hit the floor with a sick thud. I looked at the gory wound in her chest in utter disbelief, expecting she might gasp for air or show any splinter of life, but she was already gone. An eerie silence fell over the restaurant. The reality and trauma finally set in for me. I became lightheaded and could feel myself nearly passing out. Through the fog, I could hear police sirens approaching outside. The robber grabbed the bag of cash from the counter where I had dropped it. On his way out, he fired the gun erratically behind him towards anyone standing nearby. I later learned one of those final bullets killed a man who had been waiting quietly for his breakfast order when the madness broke out. The survivor guilt crushed me for weeks, thinking if I had gotten the robber what he wanted faster, that man might be alive. But the trauma counselors told me that was misplaced blame. In the end, 3 people were dead, and I was left emotionally scarred from the events of my first day. The robber was caught the next day trying to skip town. Every time I pass a McDonald's now, everything comes flooding back as if it just happened yesterday. Into the kitchen where water was steadily pooling under the sink, spreading out across the faded linoleum. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said in a voice that quivered like dry leaves. "It's been like this for days. I've had trouble getting someone out here." I nodded and got to work, sliding under the sink with my flashlight in hand. The smell hit me first, something foul and putrid, far worse than just mold or mildew. The pipes were ancient, corroded, and clearly the source of the leak. As I began to dismantle them, a thick, dark sludge oozed out, filling the air with a nauseating stench. "Looks like you've got some serious blockage here, Mrs. Beatrix," I called out, trying to keep the disgust out of my voice. She didn't respond. When I glanced over my shoulder, she was standing in the doorway, watching me with those unnervingly sharp eyes. I turned back to the pipes, focusing on clearing the obstruction. As I pulled out handfuls of the thick muck, I noticed something odd. Among the sludge were small bones, animal bones, I thought at first, but then I saw what looked like tiny, human-like fingers, complete with nails. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept working, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe a rat had gotten stuck in the pipes and decomposed, but the fingers, they were too perfect, too intact. As I probed deeper, my flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging me into darkness. The silence was oppressive, and the smell seemed to grow stronger, almost as if it were pressing down on me. "Mrs. Beatrix," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the confined space. "Do you have another flashlight?" No response. I scrambled out from under the sink, my hands covered in the vile sludge, and found the kitchen empty. Mrs. Beatrix was gone. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to navigate the dim room. That's when I saw it, a small wooden door in the corner of the kitchen, slightly ajar, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. Curiosity and dread battled within me, but the plumber in me needed to know where the pipes led. I pushed open the door and descended the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing ominously. The basement was cold, damp, and filled with the same overpowering stench. My phone's light swept across the room, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. There were jars, dozens of them, lined up on shelves, filled with murky liquid and what looked like more of those tiny bones. In the center of the room was an old, rusted tub connected to the pipes that ran up into the kitchen. Inside the tub was the source of the blockage, a grotesque, half-decomposed figure, its limbs twisted unnaturally and its face frozen in a grimace of pain. The fingers, they matched the ones I'd found in the pipes. Panic gripped me, and I stumbled back, knocking over one of the jars. It shattered, spilling its foul contents across the floor. I turned to flee, but there, at the top of the stairs, stood Mrs. Beatrix. Her eyes glinted in the dim light, and a twisted smile played on her lips. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said softly, almost kindly. "But now that you have." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I bolted past her, adrenaline fueling my sprint through the house and out the door. I didn't stop until I was safely back in my van, my heart pounding and my mind racing. I reported what I'd seen to the authorities, but when they arrived, the house was empty. The jar, the body in the tub, everything was gone. Mrs. Beatrix had vanished without a trace. That was my first and last day as a plumber. The memory of those tiny fingers in the pipe still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that Mrs. Beatrix is still out there, watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble into her web. It was the summer of 1994 when my mom was just 17. She had gotten a job folding clothes and stuff over at our local Jersey Walmart. Super excited to earn a little cash like any teenager, her first shift started normal enough, I guess. The manager set her up tidying racks in the junior section. A couple hours in, though, she noticed some scraggly older dude, 40s maybe, lurking nearby, pretending to shop. She said she could feel him watching her stack shirts and shorts from the moment she clocked in. But it wasn't until later when the guy started showing up wherever she was working, wandering the ladies' underwear aisle and areas without even hiding that he was trailing her. She asked some supervisor for help, and they were just like, "Sorry, girl, can't kick him without solid proof." So she had to just keep on minding the racks with this creepo on her heels, staring at her. At one point, she turned to see him leering at her further down an aisle. "Come over here and show me those cute little panties, sweetheart," he said, making her skin crawl. She rushed away, but he kept popping up to bother her and make uncomfortable remarks about her body. Come the end of shift, she was majorly freaked, knowing the stalker guy could be waiting for her outside. But she had no choice but to finish up and get her stuff from the back room to leave. She even tried getting a coworker to walk out with her, but they all just wanted to jet. So here's this 17-year-old petite girl having to traverse the empty, darkened store alone and get to the lot before this psycho can grab her. And what do you know? He pops out as soon as she turns into the last aisle near the rear exit. He then said, "There you are, pretty young thing." She froze, panicking at the sight of him lurching towards her, grinning. She made a break for the doors but only made it halfway across the parking lot when he caught up and dragged her back, screaming. Pinned her down, trying to rip at her top as she's kicking and clawing back. Some night patrol guard came running over from around the corner, yelling loud, which caused the creep to book it just before doing who knows what else to her. Cops took my mom's statement while she shook and cried there with ripped clothes and bloody scrapes everywhere. My mom's parents were shocked, obviously, and pulled her from the job after. She didn't leave the house alone for weeks after that trauma. Even now, all these years later, just driving past that Walmart gives me chills knowing some monster lurked there waiting to terrorize my mom trying to earn a paycheck. My mom says growing up is accepting that evil hides in plain sight. I say thank God that guard showed up, or I may not even be here telling this ugly tale. The world failed to protect her innocence that night. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.